This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
Well, welcome to BARD, and we've got our special return guest who's probably kind of competing with Jimmy Neutron in terms of guest appearances, KFA, Karen Agnifilo, whose husband, I understand today, is in trial with my daughter and has not been able to ask a single question because my daughter is apparently doing some cross along with Jacob and Zach. So I'll be interested to get the reports later today.
I'm hearing that Tenny is doing a phenomenal job, and everybody knows she's in charge of the trial. So she's doing a great job. Including
the judge, who apparently recognizes that she's the boss of Mark. So it's a little inside baseball. So I'll tell you that. So there's one of the reasons I always like to see Karen, but one of the reasons that I wanted Karen, and I don't know how much inside baseball you can give us, is there was a report yesterday that was written by a gentleman by the name of Pomerantz, who was employed by the Manhattan DA's office, I believe when you were there, Karen, as number 2. And he resigned and wrote a letter to Alvin Bragg, who is now the DA. When you were there, the DA was Cyrus Vance. And that letter has circulated, and the letter basically said that he believed that there was sufficient evidence to convict beyond a reasonable doubt Donald Trump, and was resigning because he felt like he was being, for lack of a better term, cock-blocked on his presentation. Yeah, that's a legal term.
Your word, not mine.
Correct. And I'm sure that since we're separated by thousands of miles, there won't be a harassment suit here. But I thought it would be interesting because Gary and I have talked about the fact that I didn't ask you last time you were on. Previously, some other prosecutors, while you were there, had resigned. Now the Pomerantz and I forget the name of the other gentleman, they resigned after you were there. And many people had asked, well, is this a political prosecution? You didn't, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, I suppose you can always view a prosecution as political, especially when it involves a politician who's polarizing. But I wanted to get your take on this. First of all, if I was representing a defendant and a prosecutor was resigning, I'd have problems with the fact that the investigation / prosecution was still in the air. It hadn't been closed, and this letter was out there. But I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'll just back up and give a little background. So Mark Pomerantz was he's a phenomenal lawyer. He's well known. He went to Harvard. He was a clerk. He worked for Paul Weiss. He was a nationally known trial attorney. And then he retired after an incredible career. I think he's 70 years old, and he retired. And he came out of retirement to work for Cy Vance in February of 2021. And I left a month later. So we very briefly overlapped, really not at all. And he came just to help and prosecute the Trump case. And everyone took that as a signal that there's a case, because they brought on a real prosecutor and a real sort of phenomenal prosecutor to bring it home. And he was joined by...
While you're mentioning that, he worked with or was partners at one point with Ron Fischetti, correct?
Ron Fischetti, yeah. So Ron Fischetti represents Trump. And they were law partners in the 80s. It said the 80s and early 90s. So I know it's a fun fact that was mentioned in there.
Right? That Cy Vance brings on. Who was first? Was Fischetti representing Trump first, or was...
I have no idea.
In the DA's office? Boy, the world gets smaller and smaller, doesn't it? But criminal law is a fairly small place to begin with.
It is a small place, but Mark Pomerantz is one of those people who is his credentials are unassailable. He's respected on both sides of the aisle. He's respected in state court, federal court, prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges. I mean, he's sort of a lawyer's lawyer. And so he was brought on to co-lead the team with Carrie Dunn. Carrie Dunn was somebody who's worked for Vance since I don't know for how long, but for many years as the general counsel. And he also worked on the Trump matter and supervised it and actually argued the case before the United States Supreme Court a couple of times. So they were the two co-leads. The team was large. The team had many lawyers, many prosecutors and investigators and special investigators and outside investigators and accountants and tax evaluators and property evaluators. I mean, the team was quite large. And yes, there were people who left during the investigation, and it was reported in the New York Times that some of them resigned because they didn't believe in the case. But they were much lower level people on the case than these were the two lead prosecutors. There's no doubt that these two, Carrie Dunn and Mark Pomerantz, were the lead lawyers. And in February,
just so I can set the stage, Pomerantz was brought in basically a year ago. He was there for about a year.
He was there for a year.
Carrie Dunn, as general counsel, was there at a much longer term. Exactly.
And like I said, there were many other prosecutors on it, but they were the co-leads for sure. And towards the end of Cy Vance's term, which was the end of 2021, sort of October, November, December, the New York Times had reporters staked out by the Manhattan DA's office and was able to see that there was a flurry of activity and the case was going into the grand jury. And so they could tell that the case was being presented and that witnesses were going in. And it was reported in the New York Times yesterday that Cy Vance had said, go ahead, let's put the case in the grand jury. It was a special grand jury. There's enough to charge. And go ahead. And it certainly seems like that's what was happening because of the amount of activity outside of the office. And then Alvin Bragg came in. He evaluated.
When did his term start?
So he started in January. I think he started, January 1st. I think January 3rd was the first Monday. But yes, he started January 1st, 2022. He was, he's the first African-American prosecutor, first Black prosecutor in the history of the Manhattan DA's office. He, incredible credentials, great guy, great prosecutor. Everybody was very excited to have him come on board. And, he's had a little bit of a rocky start, not just this case, but a few other matters that he's had a little bit.
The memo that was kind of quite a firestorm at one point, right?
So there's been a little bit of a rocky start, but I was willing to, and I still am willing to give him kind of the benefit of the doubt because when we started, when Cy Vance started in 2010, we had a little bit of a bumpy start, and there was a few issues that people would have said that we could have done differently. So I understand that when you're new, it's a little tricky, but this surprised me. This was sort of a very surprising decision that you could have an investigation with prosecutors that are as respected and have done as much work as Carrie Dunn and Mark Pomerantz, and that Cy Vance came forward and said, okay, there's enough here. And he was involved in the case much longer than Alvin Bragg. And Alvin Bragg, within the first 2 months, said, no, you're not bringing a case. You're not bringing an indictment. And so in February of 2022, Carrie Dunn and Mark Pomerantz, who are both very measured, level-headed people, kind of resigned in a very public, dramatic way. And,
I don't mind the resignation. I do, as a defense lawyer, have a problem with that being leaked if the prosecution is still ongoing.
It's very tricky.
Yeah, I think I've got a real problem with that. I think that, and to his credit, Pomerantz had addressed it to Alvin Bragg. I don't know who leaked it. I don't know for what end, but and whether that act was political, I suppose that could be up for discussion.
I was also wondering, what do you guys think about the time frame? I mean, I could see this being leaked right when it happened, but it seems like now we're several weeks removed. Is this a play by whoever leaked it to try to time it out with something else? Why the big gap?
I was gonna say then the other piece of Trump news today was Trump himself, unless that was Babylon Bee, which was suspended off of Twitter, apparently filed a lawsuit against the Clinton campaign today, or a RICO lawsuit. Isn't that right, Gary?
Yeah. Against the 2016 campaign. And you're reading about it. It's just, it's an insane, I don't know. I haven't quite wrapped my head around it. It seems to be alleging all kinds of things. He's somehow put a $24 million price tag or higher, maybe more, but at least $24 million, which I don't know where that number comes.
Karen, have you seen this, or did you see the reports of it? I haven't read the lawsuit yet. I take that back. I skimmed the face page and saw that it was a RICO, and then immediately sent it over to Gary to take a look. And I figure I'll do a deeper dive. But the anti-Trumpers were characterizing it as nothing more than a fundraising pivot, which you have to wonder if the election has already took place and you're the winner. What are your damages? But that's a different calculation. I don't know, but this gets past the motion to dismiss. But I'll take a look. Have you looked?
I have not had a chance. I was prepping somebody for something.
You were busy working. Very good. Keep your hours. Keep your hours. So it's an interesting kind of legal day in Trump world. Those who thought he was going to go away after he was defeated in 2020, I'm not so sure that that's the case. And there are those who think that if the other kind of rumor that's going on is if the Republicans take the House, that he would come back and be Speaker. Have you heard that?
No, I haven't heard that one. That'd be something, wouldn't it?
Yeah, wouldn't that be something? I mean, that would certainly create the reality show. I was also reading, and I'll spring this on you. There's a long form article, I want to say in the New Yorker, about Jeff Zucker and his relationship with Donald Trump. And it's a fascinating read. The spokesperson who apparently represents Zucker and Allison, who used to be at CNN, I think we should try and get on for Tuesday, Gary, because there's the thread of Jeff Zucker and NBC and The Apprentice, and then moving over to CNN, and Donald Trump saying that he had a kind of a pivotal role to play in Zucker getting that, and then Zucker getting kind of hammered for his role as the anti-Trump and ratings and things of that nature. It's really quite an article. Maybe we get both the author on and Risa, who is the spokesperson, and kind of do a deep dive into that as well on Tuesday.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. I will get into that and see if we can get it all lined up.
I think people should.
I'm going to promote you, by the way. You've got your own podcast. So why don't you tell people?
I am. But before we leave, can we just say one more thing about the resignation, really quick, before we pivot?
I want to hear.
So what happened yesterday, we didn't even get to the thing that happened yesterday, was the resignation letter was leaked. People have to read that letter. The letter is really, it's not like your usual resignation letter. Now, I was the chief assistant at the Manhattan DA's office. I read every single resignation letter. So I've read hundreds, if not more, resignation letters. I have never seen a resignation letter like the one that Mark Pomerantz wrote. Normally, most resignation letters are, "Thank you so much. I loved it. I'm moving. I got a new job. Thank you for the opportunity." And the disgruntled people,
I want to spend more time with my family.
Yeah, all of that. But if you're somewhat disgruntled or unhappy, the way you communicate that is, I hereby resign. One line kind of thing. That means you're upset. You didn't thank every person you've ever met and who's mentored you and whatever. This was a long letter that really spelled out what his thoughts are about the Trump case, about how this was handled, about whether there is a crime or not. He did throw Alvin Bragg a little bit of a bone by saying the decision he made was in good faith, but it was wrong. So that was his way of saying this is not political. I don't think it's political, but he's saying that it's wrong. But then he went on to say that he and the rest of the team, so all of the people on the team, believe that Trump is guilty of numerous felonies, that Cy Vance, who was intimately involved in the case, also believed that he was guilty of numerous felonies. He said that there's no doubt of his guilt, that Bragg had devoted, he puts in there, Bragg, you devoted a lot of time too, but you're wrong, you're misguided, and your decision is contrary to public interest. Just some of the words in there, I could not believe that he said this. He also signaled that the statute of limitations is going to run on some of these matters. So it's not like we have plenty of time to go forward. And the failure to prosecute this case poses a risk to public confidence in the fair administration of justice, and no man is above the law. And then he ended it with, I've worked too hard as a lawyer and for too long now to become a passive participant in a grave failure of justice. I mean, those are words. I've never seen anything like that before in my life. That was just shocking.
Everyone who hasn't read it yet really should take the time to go find it, because yes, I mean, it was the most
eloquent. Even embed it. Maybe you should embed it.
I don't know if I'll be able to do that, but we will link it in the description for this episode so that it's easy for people to find. But it is the most eloquent "go fuck yourself" I've ever seen. It's a master's class in deftly and respectfully just giving a straight middle finger. I mean, it is impressive. Yep. It's really good.
So I'm going to say, based on the two of your characterizations, that it was not Alvin Bragg who leaked this letter.
I don't think so.
I doubt it.
Yeah, no, the prosecution definitely.
There's two reasonable interpretations, except one of them's not so reasonable, and that would be that it was Alvin Bragg who basically leaked this to. That would be my conclusion. It was not him.
I agree. The one other thing I will say is, the governor of the state of New York, Kathy Hochul, she has the power to appoint a different prosecutor on a particular matter if she wants. And I am very interested to see if she can give Letitia James, the attorney general, who's doing the civil case, she could give her jurisdiction over the criminal matter if she wanted. The other thing that could possibly happen is the feds.
Why doesn't Tish have jurisdiction to begin with? Is that
because it's very limited. What she has some criminal jurisdiction, it's very limited, but the counties, the 60 or 62 counties in New York, the state prosecutors have the county, like Manhattan is a county, it's New York County. So they have primary and first original jurisdiction over all criminal matters. And the attorney general has very limited criminal jurisdiction, but the governor can give it to her. And so, and could give it to her in a particular case. And it's happened before. I mean, I remember when we were investigating Eric Schneiderman, who was a former governor of New York, who had to step down for there was some issues involving
Attorney General.
I'm sorry, you're right. You're right. Former Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. There were some issues about sexual
rough sex.
Rough sex and some allegations of assault. And it happened in various jurisdictions. One happened in Long Island, another happened out in the Hamptons, another happened in Manhattan. And so we started investigating, and the governor, Cuomo, ironically, took the case, took all three cases and put them together and gave them to Madeline Singas, who's now a Court of Appeals judge in New York, who was at the time a prosecutor in Long Island, the Nassau County DA. And so she got jurisdiction over all of those matters because the governor, Cuomo, at the time thought it was in the public interest that she have the jurisdiction over all three matters. So the governor is well known, and she recently mentioned that she's well aware of her powers and her authority here. So she's thinking about it for sure. I don't know if she'll do it, but the feds, the Southern District could also do this case as well. I mean, so I don't see Alvin Bragg doing it. I think the case is dead in the water from these resignations, but we'll see.
It's interesting to some degree. Tish James is not single-handedly, but politically responsible for Kathy Hochul being governor by releasing that report on Cuomo, which forced him to step down and her as lieutenant governor, taking over the governorship. And now is there a quid pro quo that the governor then says to Tish, who, by the way, also had for a moment intention to run for governor, and then pulled out of the governor's race, and now says, okay, I'm going to deputize you as your reward for putting me as governor and not running against me. And you get to bring the first criminal case against a former president in the history of the United States. So
I think it makes all the sense in the world, because they're investigating the exact same conduct. They joined forces, so there was a joint investigation. The criminal and the civil investigation were together. So it's this. There's no reason why not to do it that way, and not to give it to her. So we'll see. We'll see what the governor does, and if she does it.
Interesting, also because, as you mentioned, since they work together, Pomerantz presumably has a existing working relationship with the AG's office. And all that Tish James, if she was bequeathed by Kathy Hochul the authority to bring the case, would have to do is say, okay, I'm going to, Mr. Pomerantz, what about taking a position with the Attorney General and step right back in?
Yeah, could be done. So anyway, I have to say, I really, really like this governor too. I love Kathy Hochul. I think she's wonderful, and I hope she wins again in November.
I haven't met her, but everybody I know, including you, has said the same thing, that she just hit the ground running and she's done a wonderful job so far. I can't imagine that she would. The safest thing politically to do is obviously lateral it over to Tish James, who has made no secret of the fact that she's not a fan of Donald Trump.
Interestingly, by keeping it open, by Alvin Bragg keeping it open and keeping the investigation open and saying that it's open. I mean, nobody believes that it's still open, but he's saying that it's still open. He's kind of, hampering Tish James a little bit in her investigation. So, for example, as you said earlier, there are all these litigations with the Trumps, and Tish James was trying to get the Trumps, Donald and two of his kids, to sit for a deposition in the civil matter. And they were ordered to sit for the deposition in a civil matter. And now they're taking an appeal. And what Trump said was, I'm not going to do it because there's still this open pending criminal investigation and I could incriminate myself. So what he's saying is, put me in the grand jury and give me immunity, because in New York State, you get transactional immunity when you testify in the grand jury. So by saying that it's open and keeping it open, in some ways, it's actually, I think, having an unintended consequence, a negative consequence on the civil investigation. But we'll see. We'll see where all of this goes.
Stay tuned is the way we like to say over here, right, Gary?
Absolutely. Karen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And Mark, thank you for carving out a little time in your day as well.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, Gary.
Bye,
Gary,
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. Stay tuned for more bonus episodes coming soon.